The document room on the 4th floor of the Hargrove County Courthouse closed at 6. But Nadia Voss was still there at 11:42 that night, working through a backlog of case status notifications that her supervisor had left, again without flagging priority. The overhead fluorescent tubes gave everything in the room a faint green tint, the same color as old linoleum, and Nadia had long since stopped noticing it. She noticed the chair's corner pressing into her left hip. She noticed the specific silence of a building that held courtrooms during the day and held nothing at night except the hum of servers in the archive room down the hall. She had been doing the same small job inside this particular silence for 3 years, and she was good at it. She read the filing codes without looking them up. She could tell by the case number prefix whether a matter was civil, criminal, or probate, and she could sort 40 notifications in the time it took most clerks to sort 15. Her supervisor called her reliable, which he meant as praise and which she understood to be a polite way of saying she did not ask questions. At 11:47, she typed the outgoing status update for case file 7CR2214 into the message portal, copied what she believed was her supervisor's direct line from the department contacts sheet, and sent it. The contacts sheet was wrong by 1 digit. She would not find that out for another 4 minutes. She had already moved to the next file, shoulders bent forward in the familiar posture of a woman who had learned to take up less space, when the receipt notification blinked back wrong. Not her supervisor's name in the delivery field. A number she did not recognize. No name attached. She looked at it, and her body registered the problem before her mind assembled it into language. A contraction along her ribs. A slight rise of cold across the back of her neck. She tried to recall the message. The portal returned a single-word response. Delivered. Nadia set her hands flat on the desk. Case 7-CR-2214 was a sealed criminal matter with 2 pages of restricted status updates that her supervisor had flagged for internal routing only. She did not know what was in those pages. She knew what sealed meant, and she knew what restricted meant, and she knew, in the specific way a courthouse clerk knows things, that sending either designation to an unknown private number at 11:47 at night was the kind of mistake that did not stay quiet. She was still looking at the screen when her phone lit up with a reply from the unknown number. 3 words. Wrong number. Delete. She did not breathe for a moment. Whoever had received it had read it fast enough to reply inside 4 minutes, and the reply was not confused. It was not a question. It was an instruction, given in the flat register of someone who did not need to explain why she should do what she was told. She deleted the original message from her portal. It accomplished nothing on his end. She knew that. She saved the reply number to a note she labeled with no name, then closed her laptop, gathered her coat from the back of the chair, and walked out of the building into a November night that smelled like rain on concrete. 6 blocks from the bus stop, 2 miles from her apartment, and with a very clear understanding that she had sent sealed court records to someone who was not supposed to have them and who had answered in the middle of the night in 3 words without flinching. The bus was 12 minutes late. She stood under the metal awning at the stop and watched a black sedan pass the intersection twice without parking, and she told herself it was nothing. The way she had learned to tell herself things were nothing when the alternative was a fear she could not afford. If you have ever sent the wrong message to the wrong person at the wrong hour and felt the air in your chest go flat and strange, you already understand what Nadia's body was doing on that bus ride home. And if you want to know what came next, stay with this, because the night was not finished with her yet. She heard Grigor before she reached her floor, which was the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and radiator heat, and which she had chosen 3 years ago, specifically, because it had 2 deadbolts on every unit, and a landlord who did not give out copies of keys. She could hear Grigor Saul because he was not trying to be quiet. He was standing in the stairwell outside her apartment door with his hands in his jacket pockets and his shoulder against the wall. And when the stairwell light caught his face, she saw that he had gotten his hair cut, which he always did when he was planning to argue that he had changed. Grigor had been her partner for 2 years before she ended it, and he had been a low-level debt enforcer for the same 2 years, which she had not known until after she had already filed the restraining order that he had already violated 4 times without consequence. The last violation, he had come to her workplace and stood outside for 40 minutes. The magistrate's office had sent him a letter. He had shown her the letter and laughed. He was not laughing now, but his voice carried the same tone it always carried when he was performing patience, which was indistinguishable from the tone he used when he was about to stop being patient. "I just want to talk," he said. Nadia stopped 3 stairs below the landing. "You are violating a court order." "The court order," he said, spreading his hands as though the phrase itself was the absurdity, "is a piece of paper." She did not reach for her phone. Her phone was in her coat pocket, and she was calculating the distance between his hands and her wrists, which was an old calculation, the kind her body had been running for so long it no longer required conscious thought. What happened next was not something she could have predicted. The door at the bottom of the stairwell opened, and 2 men she had never seen walked up the stairs without hurrying. They wore jackets. One of them held a folded piece of paper. They reached the landing and positioned themselves in a way that was not aggressive and was not anything she had a word for except deliberate. The one with the paper spoke to Grigor in a low, even voice, and Nadia caught the phrase, "Your employer has been advised," and the phrase, "This is the only conversation we will have tonight," and nothing else, because her ears had filled with a low sound that was her own pulse. Grigor looked at the 2 men, and then he looked at Nadia. And what moved across his face in that moment was something she recognized from the handful of times she had seen him genuinely uncertain. He was recalculating. He was finding that the math he had been running no longer held. He left. He did not say anything else. He went down the stairs and out the door, and the sound of it closing behind him was precise and final in a way that 4 magistrates' letters had never been. She was still standing on the stairs when a 3rd man appeared in the stairwell doorway below, and the 2 who had spoken to Grigor moved aside without being asked. Daniel Torres was not a large man. He was lean and composed, and he wore a charcoal jacket over a white shirt that was still clean at that hour. And when he looked up the stairwell at her, he did not rush his assessment. He took in the situation the way a man takes in a room he has already decided to own, quietly and without performance. His jaw was set but not tight. His hands were at his sides. "You sent a document to my number tonight," he said. It was not a question. She had already known the answer would not be. "I did," she said. "I made a mistake." "You did," he said. "Are you hurt?" The question arrived without preamble, and the directness of it caught her between words for a moment. She looked at her own hands, which were steady, which surprised her. "No," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Whatever he saw, he filed it away without commenting on it, the way a careful person collects information they intend to use correctly. He said he had 2 questions, and that he would ask only those 2, and would not ask her to answer anything she did not choose to answer. The first question was whether there was someone she trusted who could stay with her tonight. The second question was whether she understood that the man in the stairwell would not come back. She told him her sister worked nights. She told him the man had come back 4 times already. Daniel was quiet for a moment after that. Not the quiet of uncertainty, the quiet of someone finishing an internal calculation. "He will not come back a fifth time," he said. She did not ask him how he knew. She was a courthouse clerk who had spent 3 years learning how institutions failed to keep promises, and she recognized, in the specific register of his voice, a different kind of promise. Not institutional, personal. "My name is Daniel Torres," he said. And that was how she learned it, at midnight in a stairwell that smelled like old carpet. From a man whose phone she had accidentally reached at 11:47 and whose organization had apparently been watching her building for less time than it took the bus to run late. She spent that night in her apartment with both deadbolts turned, and she slept badly. And in the morning, a woman named Clara appeared at her door and introduced herself as Marco's assistant. And Marco, she was told, managed Daniel's logistics. The word logistics covered, it turned out, a considerable range of practical realities. By noon, Clara had given her a phone number, a card with an address, and a piece of information that she delivered with the careful neutrality of someone relaying a policy rather than making a suggestion. Arrangements had been made. The choice to use them was hers. Nadia went to work. She filed 12 sets of notifications, answered 2 interdepartmental queries, ate lunch at her desk, and at 3:15 took the bus, not to her apartment, but to the address on the card. The building was on the city's eastern edge, 14 floors, glass and pale stone, with a doorman who said her name before she gave it to him. She rode the elevator to the 14th floor. And when the doors opened, the apartment she walked into was lit by late afternoon light coming through floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the water. There was a kitchen stocked with enough food for 2 weeks. There were clothes in a closet, folded in her size, which meant someone had paid attention to her in a way that made her stand still in the middle of the room and breathe carefully for a moment. There was also a note on the counter in a handwriting that was small and precise. It said her sister had been told she was safe, a number to call if she needed anything, day or night. Nothing was owed and nothing was required. She read the note twice. She set it on the counter. She called her sister. Renata picked up on the second ring, already knowing, because Renata had been told and had apparently asked several specific questions that Clara had answered with the careful patience of someone managing a new situation. "He just moved you there," Renata said, not quite asking. "It seems that way," Nadia said. "And you believe it," Renata said. Nadia stood at the window and looked at the water, which was dark at the edges where the November light hit it wrong, and thought about the stairwell and the 2 men and the quiet, particular weight of Daniel's voice, saying he will not come back a 5th time. "I believe it," she said. The 9 days that followed were careful and strange. Marco came once, on the 3rd day, to check that she had everything she needed, and he spoke to her with a formal courtesy that sat slightly at odds with the organized silence of men she sometimes saw near the building's entrance. Daniel texted twice. Both messages were brief. The first asked whether the apartment was sufficient. The second, 4 days later, asked whether her employer had noticed her absence from the document room. She had not been absent. She had taken the bus each morning, filed her cases, spoken to no one about anything unusual, and ridden back in the evenings to the 14th floor and its clean light and its stocked kitchen and its view of the water, which she was beginning to let herself look at without immediately cataloging exits. On the 9th day, Daniel came. He arrived in the early evening, when the city below the window was moving into its low-frequency noise, and he sat at her table with a cup of coffee she made because the kitchen was there, and she needed somewhere to put her hands. He had a file folder with him. He set it on the table but did not open it immediately. He said he had something to tell her and that she could decide, afterward, whether she wanted to stay in the apartment or whether she wanted to return to her own building with arrangements in place there instead. He said the choice was hers, either way. She nodded once, which was her way of telling him to continue without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her brace. He opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the case status document she had sent him at 11:47, 9 days ago. Case 7, CR2214, sealed, restricted. She had not looked at its contents because looking at the contents of a sealed case without authorization was a different kind of mistake. This case, he said, concerns the death of my younger brother, Matteo. The investigation was closed without charges 18 months ago. The 2 restricted status updates that you sent me are the first indication I have had that the file was reopened. She was quiet. She registered her own hands around the coffee cup, the heat of it, the specific weight of the silence between them. I did not know, she said. I know you did not know, he said. And the steadiness in his voice was not absolution and was not accusation. It was something else. The quality of a man looking at a particular situation and recognizing it for what it was without flinching from it. The document she had sent was not what had made her his obligation. The document was what had made her something other than an obligation. She looked at the copy of the case file in the folder. Someone reopened it, she said. Someone did, he said. And the only person outside my organization who touched it in the past 3 weeks is you. She thought about what that meant in its largest shape. And then she thought about what it meant in the smaller, more immediate shape of a courthouse clerk on the 4th floor with a backlog and a contacts sheet that was wrong by 1 digit. He was 24, Daniel said. He did not say anything else about Matteo. He closed the folder. The silence that came after was not the silence of a situation being managed. It was the silence of 2 people who had arrived at the same specific grief from different directions. She said, I'll stay. He looked at her across the table, and for a moment, brief and specific, the containment that defined every public register of his face was simply not there. It was there again in the next breath. She registered it without commenting on it, the same way she registered everything that mattered, through her body and not through her voice. Over the following 2 weeks, the shape of her days changed in small, accretive ways. Marco arranged for her work schedule to shift to day hours only. A car came in the mornings, a black sedan with a second-in-command who drove without conversation and who treated the courthouse drop-off with the gravity of a diplomatic transfer, which she found once quietly absurd. She told no one at work. She filed her cases. She became, gradually and deliberately, a woman who moved through her days without flinching at footsteps behind her. She did not see Grigor again. She heard once in passing, from a source she could not name, that he had taken work in another city, that his arrangement with his previous employer had been terminated, and that the termination had not been his choice. She did not ask whose choice it had been. What she did not know in those weeks was that Yusuf Crane had been watching the Eastern Corridor and its arrangements with the specific attention of a man who had been waiting for something exploitable. Crane ran the Western Syndicate, the docks he couldn't reach and the routes Daniel controlled, and he had been patient and professional about his ambitions in the way a man can be patient when he believes time is on his side. What Crane read in Daniel's arrangements for Nadia was softness. The relocation, the sedan in the mornings, the shift in logistics that Marco made without explanation. Crane read these as the behavioral signature of a man who had made himself vulnerable. And Crane believed, with the confidence of someone who had rarely been corrected, that vulnerability was always reachable. He was wrong about what the softness meant. He was also wrong about her. On a Tuesday in December, Nadia was walking through the second-floor corridor of the courthouse at 12 minutes past 4, carrying a sealed interdepartment envelope to the records office, when two men she did not recognize came into the corridor from the stairwell access, and one of them spoke her name in the flat voice of someone confirming a detail from a list. She ran 2 steps before the corridor was blocked. She had spent 2 months learning to read the specific weight of a situation, and she read this one clearly. She was outnumbered. She was in an institutional hallway on a Tuesday afternoon, and the institutional hallway had, as institutional hallways do, failed entirely to be a protection. She stopped fighting them at the car, because fighting them at the car was costing her information she needed. She went still. She breathed. She registered the route through the window, the direction, the time on the clock she could see at one intersection before they covered it. She registered the plastic restraint on her wrists, which was tightened but not optimally positioned, which was the mistake of someone who had not been careful with the knot. She had been reading small mistakes her whole life. Crane's holding location was a converted warehouse space on the western edge of the port district, which she identified by the sound of water and the specific smell of diesel that sat on top of every other smell near the outer docks. There were 4 men inside. Crane himself arrived 20 minutes after she did, and he sat down across from her in a way that was designed to convey authority, and in fact conveyed only the specific unsettled quality of a man performing authority for an audience he was not sure was paying attention. He told her she was not in danger. She recognized this as the thing men said when they wanted you to be still. "I want Daniel Torres to understand something about his priorities," Crane said. He had an accent she couldn't precisely locate. Northern, clipped, his sentences running professional and measured in the way of someone who had practiced patience. "And you are going to help me communicate that." She said nothing. "You don't speak for him," she said after a moment, not loudly. Crane looked at her with a slight recalibration of a man who had expected fear and received something else. He did not answer immediately, which told her the recalibration had cost him something. She was already working her wrists against the restraint in small, patient movements, the same way she did everything that mattered, carefully and without announcing it. The restraint gave way 7 minutes after Crane left the room to take a call. She crossed to the room's single interior door and found behind it a utility closet with a ground-level window that she could not use, and a standing shelf that she could reach. On the second shelf was a phone left there for internal communication between warehouse sections, older, not networked, a simple cellular device. She found the speed dial entry labeled for the external line. She pressed it, and when the line connected, she said, in the specific flat voice of a woman who had learned to make small, exact asks, "I'm at the Port District warehouse on the western side. The building with the red crane assembly on the exterior wall. There are 4 men that I can count." There was a pause on the line, and then Marco's voice, careful and precise. "Don't move from where you are. We are 12 minutes out." Daniel arrived in 9. She heard the outside of the building before the inside registered it. A sound like multiple car doors opening simultaneously, and then voices in a register she could not make out. And then a door coming off its frame with the specific resonance of something decided rather than forced. She stayed in the utility closet, not because she was told to, because she had read the situation and decided that staying put was the correct tactical choice, which was a different thing, and the difference mattered to her. The warehouse was not quiet for several minutes. She sat on the floor of the utility closet with her back against the shelving unit and listened to the specific vocabulary of a situation being concluded, and she was not afraid. Which surprised her for a moment, and then did not surprise her at all. When Daniel opened the utility closet door, he stood in the doorframe and looked at her on the floor. and his jaw was set in the way she had learned to read. Not as anger, not as something directed at her, but as the specific controlled register of a man who had looked at something that cost him and had not yet finished what needed to happen about it. "You broke the restraint yourself," he said. "Plastic," she said. "Wrong knot." He looked at her wrists, where the skin was red in a narrow band. He looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. He said her name, just her first name, with a weight that was not quite a question and was not quite relief. "I'm not hurt," she said. "Where is Crane?" "Being corrected," he said. She accepted this. She got up from the floor without taking the hand he offered, and she noted, as she stood, that he did not withdraw the hand quickly, only settled it against his side with the easy lack of emphasis of a man filing information away for later. Marco was in the main room of the warehouse, speaking into his phone in short, declarative sentences. 3 of Crane's 4 men were seated against the far wall, positioned with a precision that did not require explanation. The 4th was not visible. A man she had not seen before was photographing the room, working methodically. Crane was standing near the warehouse's single large window, and Daniel crossed to him with the unhurried pace of a man who knows the room is already his. 2 of Daniel's men flanked the position without crowding it. Crane said, "This is disproportionate." Daniel looked at him for a moment without speaking, and the quality of that silence was specific and total, the kind of silence that reconfigures what has been said by absorbing it without response. "She works in a courthouse," Daniel said. "She has no hand in any business between us. You put your hands on someone who has nothing to do with this because you thought it would instruct me." Crane began to speak. "You were wrong about what it would instruct me," Daniel said. And his voice had dropped exactly half a tone, and Marco, across the room, stopped his phone call. What happened next was not brutal and was not theatrical. It was methodical and witnessed, and it was the kind of conclusion that the people present would describe, afterward, only in the most factual possible terms, because there was nothing to embellish and no embellishment would have served it. Crane's operation in the Western Corridor was, in the days that followed, reduced to a series of logistics problems for other people to solve. The arrangement he had built over 4 years did not survive the month. More immediately, Crane's men, in the morning, would find themselves fielding calls from their own suppliers and partners who had been informed, without drama, that the arrangement under which they operated was no longer valid. Daniel made these calls himself, several of them, from the back of the sedan on the drive to the warehouse, and from the front room while she was still in the utility closet. The calls took 11 minutes. 11 minutes to dismantle 4 years of Crane's patient construction, which was not brutality, but was, in its way, a more complete answer than brutality would have been. There were 7 men present in the warehouse when Daniel turned to look at Nadia across the room, and all 7 of them saw what he did next, which was cross the room at the same unhurried pace and stand beside her in a way that was not a statement in words and did not need to be. Marco, from across the room, addressed her directly for the first time since she had moved into the safe apartment. He used a specific phrase, a short one, the kind of phrase that has weight in a particular world because it names a status that is not assigned but acknowledged. He said, "You will have everything you need going forward." He said it to her in front of the other men, the same way he would have said it about any arrangement that was now simply a fact of the organization's operation. She heard it. She let it settle. She was still holding the utility closet's communication phone. She set it down on a nearby surface, carefully, and that small, deliberate motion was the only acknowledgement she gave to what had just been declared. That Thursday, Renata came to the 14th floor apartment for dinner. Nadia had cooked, which meant the kitchen smelled like the specific warm weight of the things Renata had taught her. Onion and garlic and the low simmer of something that required patience. Renata arrived at 6 and stood in the apartment's doorway for a moment, taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows and the city below, and the general fact of a life that had reorganized itself around a phone call at 11:47 in November. "You look different," Renata said. "I sleep," Nadia said. "Full nights." Renata came inside, and they ate at the table by the window. And Renata asked 3 careful questions, and did not ask a 4th one that Nadia could see her holding back. The questions she asked were whether Nadia was choosing this, whether she was safe, and whether she was still the same person. Nadia answered all 3 without hesitating, which was itself an answer to the 4th question Renata had not asked. Daniel arrived at 9, after Renata had moved to the couch with her 2nd cup of tea and the specific, settled quality of a person who has decided to stay longer than planned. He knocked, which he had not done before, and when Nadia opened the door, he was in the same charcoal jacket and white shirt. And he had a small, flat box under his arm that turned out to contain the kind of pastry from the district near the courthouse that Nadia had mentioned once in passing, in a context she had not expected him to have kept. He sat at the table. Renata looked at him with the specific attentiveness of an older sister cataloging a situation. And Daniel met the attention without deflecting it, which was apparently the correct response. Because after several minutes, Renata asked him a direct question about what he expected from her sister's life. And he answered it in 2 sentences that were plain and undecorated and left nothing undefined. Renata set down her cup. She did not say she approved, because that was not the kind of thing Renata said. She said, "She makes the good soup. I hope you know that." Daniel said, "I know that." Nadia, from the kitchen counter where she'd been listening to this exchange with her back turned, felt something that sat behind her sternum shift slightly, like a door easing off a latch that had been stuck for a long time. Later, after Renata had gone, Nadia sat at the table in the chair she had been sitting in for 9 days without flinching. And Daniel was across the room at the window with the city behind him. And the apartment was quiet in the specific way that safe places are quiet. She thought about the contacts sheet on the 4th floor, wrong by 1 digit. She thought about what the courthouse clerk she had been 3 months ago would have made of the 14th floor, and the clothes in her size, and the man at the window who had made 11 minutes of phone calls on her behalf, and had then crossed a room in front of 7 witnesses to stand beside her without saying a word. That clerk had spent 3 years learning to take up less space. She was still working on the unlearning. Daniel turned from the window and looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them moved for a moment. "You said you'll stay," he said. "I said I'll stay," she said. He nodded once, the way she nodded when she meant it. She recognized the gesture. The city through the window was the same city it had always been, still dangerous at its edges, still indifferent to single women in 4th-floor document rooms, still home to men who believed that a piece of paper with a court seal was just a piece of paper. It had not changed. Her position inside it had. Renata's coat was still on the hook by the door, forgotten. The way Renata's things always turned up in Nadia's spaces, reliable and warm and a little in the way. Nadia looked at it from the table. The pastry box was still open on the counter. The window held the water and the lights and the low November dark. And beside the window stood a man who had asked if she was hurt before he had asked for anything else, and who had not, in the months since, asked for anything at all. She was the only one at that table who had not flinched. He would tell her much later. meaning the table at the courthouse where she had eaten her lunch alone every day for 3 years, while the world around her rearranged itself into threats she had learned to catalog without reacting to. He had seen her from a window once, before the 11:47 message, before Grigor in the stairwell, before any of it. And he had noticed the way she ate her lunch with both hands around the container, and her eyes moving across the courtyard below with the quiet, unhurried thoroughness of someone who reads everything and performs nothing. He had noticed. She had not known then that she was being noticed. She had simply been eating her lunch and doing what she had always done. Reading the room, reading the exits, reading the specific weight of a world that had not been designed to make things easy for her. She was still doing that. She simply had a different room now. And when she read it, what she found was different from what she had been finding for a long time. Renata's coat hung on the hook. The pastry box sat on the counter. The water was dark at the edges and lit at the center and entirely, permanently outside. Nadia Voss did not flinch.